Here in Western Washington, the Garry oak acorn is really important, at least traditionally, to the Salish peoples and the Chinookan peoples of the Columbia River, the Salish people of the Salish Sea area. You know, a few other groups as well, like on the Olympic Peninsula, they were used a little bit. You know, it's kind of range dependent, so the places where the Garry oaks are more abundant, there's definitely a lot more history of traditional use. My name's Abe Lloyd. I'm an ethnobotanist and I am an adjunct instructor at Western Washington University. And I'm really interested in indigenous foods in particular and the Pacific Northwest. In some parts of North America, there are a lot of oaks. In California, there are probably over 10 or 15 species. In the Midwest, there's numerous species. But here in Washington, we just have one species, the Garry oak, that's native. In Western Washington, its range is pretty restricted to like the Olympia area where it's really abundant, the San Juan Islands where it's really abundant, and then in Whatcom County it's actually very uncommon. It's found in a few places in the Chuckanut Mountains. It's a species that's adapted to very dry, droughty conditions, and since the San Juan Islands are in the rain shadow of the Olympic Mountains, it's very dry there, and so it does well there. Oak Harbor is a place with really well-drained soils, and it's in the rain shadow, so it kind of checks both those boxes in terms of climate suitability. And so there are a lot of Garry oaks in the Oak Harbor area and on Whidbey Island in general. The acorns are edible, and a lot of animals like to eat them. Bears love eating them, deer eat them, and squirrels in particular. Starting from a global perspective, acorns around the planet are very important. Just about any indigenous culture that had a hunter-gatherer or a non-agricultural food tradition depended on acorns if they were around. You probably can get away with eating most acorns, but you know, people generally don't want to eat something that has a bug in it. There's something called a weevil that bores into the acorns. They both bore in and they bore out, and you can actually see the scars from both of those attacks. So when you're picking up acorns, you could look at those bundles on the top, and if you see a blemish in one of those bundles on the disc, it probably has an acorn weevil in it. And a lot of other friends of mine that eat acorns today kind of dry them on trays in their house next to a fire or next to a forced air register where periodic warm air is blowing over them. So acorns have a lot of tannins in them, so the next step in processing is leaching out the tannins. They leach those tannins out whole. So they buried, let's just say you have one acorn, you bury it in a stream next to a river and the water is constantly moving by. Tannin is this really bitter chemical. It's water soluble, and so if water is flowing by that acorn, it will slowly leach out. So I grind the acorns up into a flour. And then they have, you know, a tremendous amount of surface area for their volume ratio, and they leach really, really quickly. So then I just have this kind of cloth filter thing. I put the acorn flour in like an inch deep in that cloth filter and pour water over it, and I could leach acorns in about a day using that method. You know, it doesn't have an exceptional flavor in this state, but when you mix it and you cook it, it becomes sweet and really delicious. I think it has a flavor that's reminiscent of molasses, actually. It's a really nutritious and delicious wild edible food that, you know, if you're in the Oak Harbor area, it's growing in your backyard. I have to drive down the Oak Harbor area to harvest these every year. And that's my percolation method. It wasn't invented by me, but it's the method that I use for processing my Garry oak acorns.
My name is Melissa Duffy. I have taught classes on Garry oak ecosystems through the Heritage Institute, and I've been a board member of the Salal Native Plant Society. And I've been an educator, a freelance educator with People and Plants, nature-based programs. I'm currently a member of the Garry Oak Society. I got involved about 15 years ago with a giant old oak that was at the post office that was about to be executed. And that really started my intensive care for the oaks of Oak Harbor. So my favorite way to do it now is I do start by removing the outer shell and then the papery shell that covers the meat. And then I pulverize them in my mortar and pestle. And then I immediately put them in water. And I change the water multiple times. Once I do that, then I again use the blender to get them even smaller. And then I use a food dehydrator to dehydrate them. And then I use a food mill where I make them very tiny into flour. So as a freelance educator, I've gone into different schools, both locally and out of this area. And I went into one grade school in Oak Harbor of fourth graders because part of their curricula is they need to learn about natural history, native cultures. After the lesson that they had with me, which was over a period of time, they all could identify what an oak seedling was because they went through an entire process. I took them out here to this beautiful Garry oak garden full of, this grove is full of ancient oaks, and it was in the fall. And they harvested acorns just like Easter eggs, and they were super excited. And they never forgot oak trees after that, or acorns. Like they got connected with their sense of place, which is what ideally all of our children and all of our adults do as well.